Welcome to the Female Piercers Podcast, the first piercing podcast made for women by women. I'm your host, Nurse Tracy, Vermont licensed registered nurse, body piercer, and piercing shop owner. And on this week's episode of the Female Piercers Podcast, I want to talk about, should you pierce yourself? And the short answer is no. The long answer is definitely not. That being said, have I attempted to pierce myself? Absolutely. I don't think you can call yourself a teenage girl unless you've tried. But now that we're adults, we have access to professional piercers. Should we continue to pierce our friends or ourselves at home? Now, I want to start by talking about the actual risks of piercing yourself. And the first one is improper placement. If you pierce yourself in the wrong area of the anatomy with the wrong tools or wrong jewelry, it could cause excessive bleeding, pain, or make the piercing appear crooked. More importantly, if you pierce yourself in an area that's difficult to see, maybe the side of your ear, an intimate area, it may make you struggle to complete the piercing. And I don't recommend asking a friend to get involved, especially if they're inexperienced, because you're asking for an increased risk of infection, which we'll talk about in a minute. Now, the next concern is going to be excessive pain and bleeding. And that is going to happen if the piercing is misplaced, rather it be too shallow, too deep, you hit a nerve, hit a vessel. And if that happens and you're alone, what if you need to seek medical attention? What if you need help quickly? It's going to make it an even bigger challenge if you're freaking out, if you're panicking. And say it just hurts and you start shaking, you lose connection with the needle and the jewelry and can't complete the piercing. Now you've just poked yourself for no reason, or maybe you need to poke yourself twice to get the job done. If you are, again, asking a friend to help you and they don't have gloves on, which I often see in piercing fail videos, then you're going to get an increased risk of infection, which is going to increase swelling, increase potential bleeding, bruising. And it may make you have to take the piercing out, heal the area, and get it re-pierced if you can at all. Because what if now there's scar tissue? What if there's a small deformity making the area just not look good? You don't want to draw attention to it with jewelry anymore. I'm not concerned generally about infection in my practice because I'm licensed, I'm inspected, I go through bloodborne pathogen training every year. I have sterile tools that I'm getting from professional suppliers. So I'm feeling pretty comfortable when I send somebody out the door with a piercing. But if you're getting cheap tools at home that are disposable from Amazon, you're not really sure what the supplier is, if they're a trustworthy source, if you don't use gloves, then you're just asking for trouble. And say you do get ill, say you have to go to the doctor, you have to get a prescription for an antibiotic because you have a fever, you've got to call out of work because you just don't feel well, you're laid up on the couch for a few days. Now you've got to deal with the consequences, not only the time and financial consequences of having this piercing done improperly the first time, but now you've probably got to go spend money to get it redone a second time. So just go and have somebody professional do it right the first time. Don't take the risk that you can't have that area bejeweled any longer because you've had an issue. Now, the one thing that I see most often occur, even if a home piercing goes well, is increased swelling. And if you watch some of those piercing videos of amateurs at home, they are significantly longer than the professional piercer videos. And that's because usually the person stops and goes, oh my gosh, I did it. Can you believe it? And then they fumble, they struggle, which is my favorite part, to complete the connection between the piercing and the jewelry. And during that struggle, you have increased swelling around the needle with the tissue starting to compress around it. So that could make it harder to slide the jewelry through. That could mean a longer healing process. And it brings us back to increased potential of pain, swelling, and infection. So you also want to make sure that you have the proper size jewelry. I love seeing the videos where they've mismatched the needle and the jewelry size, and then they can't complete the piercing either because they don't have the right tools. If you're not sure what you're doing, make an appointment with a professional piercer. It's probably going to take you just as long as ordering on Amazon, but hey, no shipping delays. And I want to investigate also the reasons why people might get pierced, because those are valid too. And usually the answer is they're minors, and in their state, either they're not allowed to get a piercing or their parent won't give them permission to get a piercing. And to that I say, if you're piercing yourself at home, yes, obviously your state or your parent knows why you shouldn't get that piercing, because they also would have concerns about how you're able to care for it. So if it goes well, which is usually a fluke, and you continue to pierce yourself, you're just asking for trouble in the end. Wait and go to a reputable place where you know it's going to be done correctly. Now, I know a lot of people do pierce themselves at home because, for example, they live in a rural area where maybe there's not a piercer. Maybe there's not a trustworthy piercer. I've had that experience in my own area where you've got to travel 1 to 2 hours either way to get into a shop, and the shop may have somebody there that you've heard not great things about. So in the end, if Amazon delivers, hey, why not? Seems easy, right? I totally understand why people would pierce themselves. But you want to make sure that you're doing it the right way, that you're making a connection with a reputable piercer and a reputable shop. That way, if you ever do have a complication, you have somebody to reach back out to. You're not just asking Dr. Google and getting the wrong information and potentially ending up not liking the experience in the end when it could have been a really great experience. So earlier in the episode, I mentioned that I had pierced myself before. And while I've attempted to pierce my ears, my navel in my teens, I was never successful. And I honestly never actually had the correct tools. I was trying to usually do it with a needle from a sewing kit and some old jewelry that I had lying around that definitely wasn't sterile. I was really never going to pierce myself. That was never in the cards. I always watched those videos and on YouTube of people failing or doing it at home or doing it on themselves and thought, oh my gosh, they are crazy cakes. I don't know what they're smoking. But in 2022, I did it. I pierced myself. And if you don't believe me, you can go and you can Google, I pierced my own tongue, and check out the video. Please leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, why the hell did she pierce her own tongue? What was she trying to prove? You're exactly right. I did it out of spite. And I think that's truly the only reason why I was able to do it. I was asking my piercing apprenticeship supervisor if I could pierce tongues. I had clients reaching out, asking me if I was ready, and I felt ready. But he said, no, I want you to pierce a few friends' tongues first. I wasn't able to find any friends that wanted tongue piercing. So one day I said to him, what if I just pierce my own tongue? I totally said it jokingly, but in that moment, I saw his eyes light up and he looked at me and he's like, you don't dare, you wouldn't do it. And that's when I knew I had him. I knew that if I pierced my own tongue, I would get my way. I would be able to start piercing clients. So was it easy, my friends? No. And if you watch the video closely, you will see that I was shaking like a leaf. And at one point when I get the jewelry through, I go, because I was in a cold sweat. All I could think of was worst case scenario. What if it goes wrong? And you'll hear my friend Shauna in the background. I was talking to her. I was asking her, do you think this looks good? And right before we started recording, I said to her, just put on a video of somebody that's doing it at home, because it's going to give me confidence. If they can do it at home, I can do it here in a professional setting out of spite. And so we watched a video of a drunk girl piercing her own tongue at 2 a.m. And I said, that's it. All right, if I can do it, if she can do it, I should say, then I can do it. And so I pierced my own tongue and it went well. I did it with gloves on, people. And thankfully, with that bit of blind confidence, I was brave enough to complete it and complete other tongue piercings since then. Yes, I win. But you want to make sure that you've been training, you're experienced, you've got something wrong with you. Because if you continue to pierce yourself at home or attempt to pierce friends at home, you're also asking for a legal quandary if you get found out, because eventually if something does go wrong and you get reported, now you're affecting your ability to pierce people in the future because you're starting to develop a reputation. So should you pierce yourself? No. Make sure you're going to a licensed professional. Make sure they're using the correct tools in a professional setting. And in the next 2 episodes, we're going to talk about how do you choose a piercer? How do you choose the right piercing setting, the right shop to go get a piercing in? But first, if you like this episode, I want you to hit the like button. I want you to subscribe and head on over to YouTube and do the same thing when you check out my I Pierced My Own Tongue video. And I'll see you next time on the Female Piercers podcast. I'm your host, Nurse Tracy. I hope you enjoyed this episode.